In this work, we propose a real-time nmpc tailored to a legged robot for achieving dynamic locomotion on a wide variety of terrains. We introduce a mobility-based criterion to define an nmpc cost that enhances the locomotion of a quadruped robot while maximizing the leg mobility and staying far from the kinematic limits. For nmpc formulation, we choose the predicted state and control input as decision variables. L is the stage cost, consisting of the tracking term for the decision variables and a term related to mobility. LT is the terminal cost, equation 1b is the initial condition, and 1c represents the dynamic constraints given by the rigid body dynamic model. Equation 1d defines the unilateral and friction cone constraints. Vector xk is composed of the robot's COM position, COM velocity, base orientation, and angular velocity. The control inputs UK are the ground reaction forces, and finally vector AK includes the model parameters. We employ the concept of mobility to enable the nmpc to choose robot orientation adaptively to any terrain. To evaluate mobility, we consider the manipulability ellipsoid that is visualized in the left figure with the changing leg configuration. The volume of the ellipsoid depicted in the right top figure is maximum at an extended leg configuration because the leg mobility is increased in xy direction but it remains limited in the z direction. Hence, we also consider the isotropy of the ellipsoid expressed as the inverse of its eccentricity as shown in the right bottom figure to define a metric for the mobility. A metric for the mobility that we call mobility factor is defined with the normalized values of the volume and the eccentricity of the manipulability ellipsoid. Parameters beta and gamma are introduced to find the best trade-off between the volume and the eccentricity. Using this formula, the mobility factor can be evaluated inside the workspace of each leg. This analysis gives the hip to foot distance belonging to the highest mobility, and it is used as a reference for the mobility costs inside the nmpc. First, we run the nmpc with and without mobility to traverse a pallet. The nmpc without mobility maintains a constant horizontal orientation of the robot space, hence reaching the kinematic limits in some legs. On the other hand, when the mobility is turned on, the robot pitches while climbing up and down from the pallet to maximize the leg mobility and stay away from the kinematic limits. This simulation demonstrates the importance of continuous replanning at a higher rate. Here, the robot is commanded with a constant forward and heading velocity. Since the replanning at a lower rate of 0.8 Hz causes to increase in state drifts due to model uncertainties and tracking errors, the robot walks badly and falls in the end. However, at a higher replanning rate of 25 Hz, the robot walks successfully while compensating for these uncertainties and errors. We test our nmpc with mobility to cross a set of pallets, each of 1 meter length with the varying heights. Again, the robot pitches as required to maintain the leg mobility. The nmpc is helped by vision-based foothold adaptation (VFA) by providing the corrected footholds to avoid collisions, narrow gaps, and the footholds outside the workspace of the swinging leg. In the first experiment, we run the nmpc on the high-key robot to perform omnidirectional walk on a flat terrain. In this experiment, the robot is commanded to walk forward or backward, then laterally, and finally when the heading velocity is commanded, the robot turns left as well as right while walking. This experiment validates that the nmpc computes feasible trajectories for the robot after receiving different velocity commands from the user while walking. In the second experiment, HiQ traverses a pallet with the help of nmpc with mobility. Here, the nmpc is assisted by VFA. The nmpc provides optimal pitch to the robot to maintain the good mobility and hence to stay away from the kinematic limits. The robot pitches up while climbing up the pallet and pitches down consequently while climbing down from the pallet, preserving the leg mobility during the locomotion. In this experiment, a pallet is pushed in front of the robot while walking. The VFA provides corrected footholds to the nmpc, and the nmpc adapts by adjusting the pitch of the robot's base during the swing phase of the right front leg to attain good mobility at its touchdown.